You've probably seen the word before, cherubim. And odds are, the image that pops into your mind is probably a chubby pink baby with little wings, maybe holding a bow, floating around in some Renaissance painting. But if you dig just a little deeper, past the oil paint and pop culture shorthand, you'll find something much stranger, something ancient, something terrifying. The real cherubim have nothing to do with Valentine's Day. They weren't painted into ceilings to make people swoon. These were guardians, gatekeepers, beings of power with a form too wild to fit any one mold. They had wings, sure, but not just two. They had faces, multiple, and eyes. So many eyes, enough to see everything and miss nothing. This isn't a story about sweet little angels watching over us. This is about the ones who stood guard at the threshold of paradise, the ones who held the line between the divine and everything else. They weren't messengers or musicians, they were something else, something meant to be feared. So who or what are the cherubim? Where did they come from? What role do they play in the divine structure of heaven? And how did they become so misunderstood over the centuries? We're going to explore all of it, from their bizarre appearance to the responsibilities they were given, from their earliest mentions in sacred texts to the way they've been warped by modern imagination. But let's make something clear before we start. This isn't a sermon. It's not theology, it's mythology. We're pulling from sacred texts, yes, but we're treating them the same way we would treat the myths of Olympus, Asgard, or ancient Mesopotamia. We're looking at lore, stories, symbolism, and the strange, powerful figures that rise out of it all. So if you're ready, let's begin. Not with the world, but with the ones who were already watching when the gates of Eden slammed shut. This is the story of the cherubim, the four-faced angels from Christian mythology. The cherubim show up early, right near the beginning when everything is still fresh, raw, and untouched by human hands. We don't get a detailed play-by-play of how they were made, but what's clear is that they've always been close to the source. In the divine order of things, they're not part of the background. They're front and center, hovering near the very presence of God, part of that inner sanctum where few things are allowed to exist. The earliest glimpse we get is subtle but striking. In the book of Genesis, just after Adam and Eve are driven out of Eden, the cherubim are posted at the gates, not as passive guards, but as a fiery line in the sand. They're there to keep humanity from ever reaching back toward the tree of life. That's not an assignment you give to just any being. It's a job for something ancient, something that understands power, judgment, and permanence. But that's just the first peek. As the scriptures unfold, it becomes clearer that the cherubim aren't new arrivals to the scene. They're bound to God's throne, literally. In multiple visions, they appear as part of the very structure that carries or surrounds his presence. In Ezekiel's vision, they're the wheels and wings beneath the throne that moves with divine fire and force. They aren't just following orders. They're part of how God moves through the world. Some early traditions suggest they were created as part of the very first tier of spiritual beings, beings not meant to serve humanity, but to serve God directly. They're not there to comfort or guide. They're there to guard, to support, to maintain the order of heaven itself. And unlike other angelic figures that pop in and out of stories, cherubim always appear in relation to something holy, something untouchable. They don't leave messages. They don't deliver visions. They are the vision. Their origins aren't spelled out in detail for a reason. The cherubim are part of that first spark of divine will, crafted for a role so specific, so intense, that they've remained locked to it ever since. You don't question where they came from. You just understand that they've always been near the throne, and they're not going anywhere. Trying to picture a cherub is like trying to hold a thunderstorm in your hands. Every detail adds to the intensity. These aren't graceful figures floating in a beam of light. They're complex, layered, and downright overwhelming to imagine. When Ezekiel tried to describe them, you could almost feel him struggling to find the right words. What he saw wasn't something your mind can easily organize. They have wings, lots of wings, 4, sometimes 6, depending on the source, and they aren't just decorative. Some cover their bodies in reverence, others stretch upward in motion. And then there are the faces, not just one but four. One looks like a man, another a lion, then an ox, and finally an eagle. Together, those faces are said to reflect the fullness of creation: intelligence, strength, service, and swiftness. But all in one being? It's more than symbolic. It's deliberately overwhelming. Then come the eyes. That's what really sets them apart. They're everywhere. On the wings, on the bodies, sometimes even woven into the wheels that move with them. These aren't just for seeing. They represent full awareness, constant vigilance. Nothing escapes them. They see in every direction without ever having to turn their heads. If angels were created to reflect parts of the divine, the cherubim were clearly built to reflect God's all-seeing presence. And despite all this, there's a strange beauty in their form. Not soft beauty, awe-inducing beauty. The kind that stops you in your tracks and leaves you unsure whether to stare or drop to your knees. That's the point. Their appearance isn't just strange for the sake of being strange. It's meant to push you out of your comfort zone, to show you that this is what divine proximity really looks like. When John sees something similar in the book of Revelation, these living creatures covered in eyes crying out day and night, he doesn't stop to describe how that made him feel. But you can imagine, these aren't beings you approach casually. They are visual proof that heaven doesn't play by earthly rules, that holiness, real holiness, doesn't always look the way we think it should. If you had to sum up what the cherubim do, it'd be this: they protect what's sacred, they carry what's holy, and they serve the presence of God directly, without question, without rest. That might sound simple at first glance, but each of those roles is loaded with meaning. These aren't just powerful beings hanging around in heaven. They're tied to its structure, its order, and the way it interacts with the world. Let's start with the guardian role. The first time we meet the cherubim, they're standing at the entrance to Eden, armed with flaming swords, blocking the way back to the tree of life. That wasn't just security detail, it was a statement. More on this later. Then there's their role as carriers. In Ezekiel's vision, God's throne isn't stationary, it moves. And what moves it? The cherubim. Their wings stir the air, their forms burn like fire, and they bear the throne like living foundations. It's one of the most striking images in all of Scripture. Divine presence rolling across the skies, supported by creatures too strange to explain and too holy to ignore. They're not just part of the vision, they are the mechanism behind it. More on this later as well. Now about that flame. Fire shows up constantly in connection to cherubim. Not fire for destruction, but fire for purification, for awe, for power. Ezekiel saw them gleaming like burnished bronze, full of glowing coals and lightning flashes. There's a reason for that. Fire in Scripture often represents God's presence, His purity, and His judgment. When it clings to the cherubim, it marks them as extensions of that power, not as wielders of it, but as beings shaped to withstand it. In terms of behavior, they don't speak much. They don't wander or wonder or question. Their loyalty is absolute. Their movements are direct. There's a kind of intensity to them, like they're always mid-mission, always fixed on whatever task has been handed down. It's not about obedience in a robotic sense. It's more like they were made for one purpose, and they've never strayed from it. And within the bigger hierarchy of angels, the cherubim stand near the top. They're often placed just below the seraphim, those burning six-winged beings closest to God's throne. Where the seraphim burn with worship, the cherubim burn with awareness. They hold knowledge, bear witness, and guard the holy with a presence that never fades. They don't just exist near glory, they uphold it. The first time the cherubim show up in the Bible, it's not in a vision or some divine throne room. It's in the aftermath of humanity's first mistake. Adam and Eve had just been cast out of Eden. The world had shifted, innocence was gone, and standing between them and the way back were the cherubim. It's a short moment in the text, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But it says a lot. In Genesis 3:24, after driving Adam and Eve from the garden, God places cherubim on the east side of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life. Not just standing there either, they're paired with a flaming sword that turns in every direction. It's a vivid image. Fire and eyes, judgment and vigilance, stationed right at the edge of paradise. This wasn't just about keeping two people from sneaking back in. It was a barrier between fallen humanity and something that no longer belonged to them: immortality. If Adam and Eve had reached the tree again, things would have spiraled in ways that no redemption could fix. The cherubim were placed there to make sure that didn't happen. That's how serious their job was. And the sword? It's not just there for dramatic effect. It represents the danger of crossing that line. This was the first time something divine had to be defended from mankind. The cherubim became the enforcers of that line. Silent, steadfast, unyielding. There's something chilling about that moment too. Eden wasn't just lost, it was sealed. And it was sealed by beings that didn't blink, didn't move, didn't reason. They just watched and waited. That's the power they carry. Not violence or wrath, but the kind of authority that doesn't need to speak twice. And even though Eden eventually faded from the world, that image of the cherubim, standing guard at the edge of something sacred, never really went away. In fact, it reappears in another form later on. Not outside a garden, but inside a golden box. That's where we're headed next. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. Long after Eden was closed off, long after the flame and sword faded into memory, the cherubim returned, this time not in a garden, but in a wilderness. The people of Israel had been freed from Egypt, wandering through the desert, and God gave Moses very specific instructions on how to build something sacred: the Ark of the Covenant. At its core, the Ark was a container, but what it carried was far more than stone tablets. It represented God's presence among His people, a mobile holy ground, set apart from the rest of the world. And perched above it, carved from pure gold, were two figures, two cherubim. These weren't decorative flourishes. Every detail was intentional. The cherubim faced each other, their wings stretching out and meeting in the middle, creating a space called the mercy seat. That's where God's presence would dwell, not inside the box, but above it, hovering between those outstretched wings. It's a striking contrast to their earlier appearance. In Eden, they were a warning. Here, they're a covering. They still guard something sacred, but now they do so from within a space of mercy and meeting. The cherubim didn't stop being fierce, but their fierceness was now directed inward, protecting the connection between God and His people, rather than blocking it entirely. Only the high priest could approach the ark, and even then only once a year on the Day of Atonement. The air around it was considered holy, untouchable. That sense of awe? It came not just from what was inside the ark, but from what was above it, the invisible presence of God flanked by the golden forms of the cherubim. Their wings weren't just raised, they were reaching. That detail mattered. The cherubim were locked in eternal motion, frozen in a posture of reverence and alertness, symbolizing that divine presence wasn't passive. It was active, responsive, and always aware. And even though these cherubim were sculpted from gold, they weren't just symbols. They were reminders of the real ones. The ones seen in visions, the ones who move with fire, the ones who once stood at the edge of Eden. Their placement on the ark wasn't just about art, it was about continuity, about showing that God's presence, once guarded and distant, had chosen to dwell, at least for a time, among the people. But that presence doesn't always stay still. In the visions of the prophets, it moves, and when it moves, the cherubim go with it. If you want to see the cherubim at full power, alive, moving, almost too much to take in, Ezekiel's vision is where it all comes together. This wasn't a quiet glimpse of heaven. This was a full-blown encounter. Fire, thunder, living beings. And in the middle of it all, the cherubim, unlike anything Ezekiel or anyone else had ever seen. Ezekiel was by the Kibar River when the sky cracked open. What he saw was a storm rolling in, not just rain and lightning, but a glowing storm with fire flashing back and forth. And from within that fire came 4 living creatures. These were cherubim, but not as golden statues or distant guards. These were the real deal. Alive, loud, moving. Each one had 4 faces: man, lion, ox, and eagle, and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet like those of a calf, gleaming like polished bronze. Under their wings were human hands, and their wings touched each other, keeping them in perfect formation. They moved like a unit, straight ahead, without turning, always in sync. And then there were the wheels. Each cherub had a wheel beside them, and each wheel was a wheel within a wheel, like a gyroscope, turning in any direction without needing to pivot. The rims of the wheels were covered in eyes, and when the cherubim moved, the wheels moved with them. When they stopped, the wheels stopped. It wasn't just coordination, it was unity. The spirit of the beings was in the wheels themselves. Above the cherubim was a platform, like crystal, and above that, a throne. A figure sat on it, glowing like fire, radiating light, too brilliant to fully describe. This was no ordinary vision. This was a direct encounter with the glory of God, and the cherubim weren't just present, they were carrying it. They were the chariot, the storm, the foundation beneath the throne. This vision flipped everything. The cherubim weren't just stationed in holy places, they moved with holiness. They didn't just guard what was sacred, they transported it. And they weren't distant observers. They were deeply, intricately involved in how God's presence interacted with the world. It's no wonder Ezekiel fell flat on his face. The cherubim weren't gentle, reassuring beings. They were overwhelming. Their presence shook the ground, because they brought heaven with them. And this vision wasn't a one-time event. It would echo again later in another vision, one seen by a man named John, at the end of all things. By the time we reach the book of Revelation, the world is no longer what it was. Time is unraveling. Judgment is near. And once again, just like in Eden and Ezekiel's vision, the cherubim are right there, positioned at the center of it all. John's vision in Revelation opens with a scene that's both familiar and completely overwhelming. He's taken up into heaven and finds himself standing before a throne, surrounded by thunder, flashes of lightning, and a sea of glass like crystal. Around the throne are 4 living creatures. Sound familiar? Each has 6 wings. They are covered with eyes, front and back. These living creatures, often interpreted as cherubim, aren't just decorations or background detail. They're leading the worship in heaven. They're calling out truths that echo throughout time and space. Their constant praise isn't just about devotion, it's about alignment. They are so close to God's presence that praise pours out of them naturally, constantly, without rest. But they're not just praising, they're watching. Those eyes aren't just physical features, they symbolize awareness that extends in every direction. These are the same beings Ezekiel saw, only now they're no longer in motion. They're surrounding the throne itself, anchored in place as witnesses to everything unfolding. And when the seals are broken, when the scroll is opened and the events of the end begin to play out, these creatures are there. They announce judgments. They call forth riders. They react to what they see. This is a different kind of role than they've played before. They're not just guards or carriers anymore. They're participants, still close to the throne, still filled with eyes, but now, acting in ways that steer the course of what comes next. It's a full circle moment, from the gates of Eden to the Ark of the Covenant, from Ezekiel's chariot to the throne in Revelation. The cherubim are always where God's presence is most concentrated. And at the very end, when heaven opens and everything hidden is revealed, they're still there, watching, praising, waiting, not fading away, but standing their ground, just like they always have. After everything we've seen, the fire, the wings, the eyes, the silence, the thunder, it's tempting to try and sum up the cherubim in a neat sentence, to say they're guardians, or they're carriers, or even they're angels. But the truth is, they're not so easily boxed in. They don't fit clean categories, and maybe that's the point. The cherubim aren't just powerful beings with strange appearances. They're boundary keepers, threshold watchers. They show up wherever something divine is happening and make it very clear, you are standing on holy ground. In Eden, they stood between humanity and the tree of life, not out of cruelty, but to preserve something no longer meant to be touched. In the ark, they hovered over the place where God would meet with his people. In Ezekiel's vision, they carried the throne itself. In Revelation, they circled it, always near, always aware, always tied to the moments when heaven and earth almost touch. And maybe that's the best way to understand them. They're a sign that something bigger is close. Not just God, but the parts of God that overwhelm you. The glory, the judgment, the presence that makes people fall to their knees without knowing why. The cherubim don't speak much, but their very existence says something. That God isn't distant. He's right here, and he doesn't arrive quietly. They remind us that divine presence isn't always warm and glowing. Sometimes it's sharp and blazing. Sometimes it moves with fire and wheels. Sometimes it watches you without blinking. And yet, it's not hostile. It's just holy. And holiness, real holiness, can be both terrifying and beautiful all at once. So what are the cherubim really? They're the ones who never left their post. The ones who've stood guard since the beginning. The ones who don't need to speak because their presence says everything. And maybe that's why they still linger in the background of Scripture, not demanding attention, but never far from it.